Good morning, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. We've had a little bit of a technical difficulty with Zoom scheduling system. My name is Nathan Screslet. I'm on the JLARC staff, and I'll be facilitating the technical part of today's meeting. In the interest of time, I'll keep it short because we have a pretty packed agenda today. Let's see, I will share my screen here.
I lost it. Hello? I lost him.
All right. Can everyone see this?
Yep.
All right.
Nope.
So I won't go over the participant tiers. Everyone's pretty familiar with those at this time. So just as a quick reminder, I ask everyone to mute your mics when not in use. If you forget, I have the ability to do that remotely, but I don't have the ability to turn them back on. So you'll have to remember to do that when you want to speak. If you want to ask a question during the presentations, our speakers will pause regularly to invite questions. Just ask the chair to be recognized to ask your question or make your comment. If you're using audio only, not video for this briefing, just please identify yourself before speaking so that we know who you are. So I will go through the roll call real quickly here. Just be ready on your mic to let us know that you're attending. Do we have Delegate Austin? Okay. Delegate Carr?
Present.
Thank you. Speaker Fillicorn?
Present.
Thank you. Delegate Cox?
Here.
Okay. Delegate Herring?
Here.
Senator Howell?
Here.
Senator Locke?
Here.
Senator Normand?
Here.
Ms. Mavridis?
Here.
Senator McPike?
Here.
Delegate Orrock? Delegate Plum?
Here.
Delegate Sickles?
Present.
Senator Spruill?
Present.
And Delegate Torian?
Present.
All right. I'll turn it back over to Hal.
Nathan, this is Delegate
Yes.
Austin, President, sorry.
Oh, thank you, sir. All right. I will hand things back over to Hal to go over today's agenda.
Thank you, Nathan. Mr. Chairman, we have a full agenda this morning, and we'll do our best to move through it expeditiously. The first item on the agenda will be a presentation of our findings from our review of the Department of Education. The next item will be an update on VITA's implementation of a multi-supplier service model for the state's infrastructure services. The third item will be presenting our annual update on state spending, and then finally, we'll provide a brief presentation on Medicaid spending and enrollment. First up this morning, Mr. Chairman, is our review of the State Department of Education. As you will hear today, there's a lot positive to report regarding DOE, and the current superintendent generally gets high marks for the work he's done to strengthen the department since he's arrived. We do highlight in the report areas in which DOE can improve to ensure Virginia has a strong public education system throughout the state. You'll hear this morning about DOE's efforts to help struggling divisions and schools improve. This is one of the most critical responsibilities that DOE has. And unfortunately, historically, this function has not been sufficiently prioritized or as effective as it needs to be. We have concluded that the state and DOE can and should do better in this area, and we have recommendations to address it, given that every child in Virginia deserves the opportunity for a quality education. I want to thank Superintendent Lane and his staff for their cooperation and assistance throughout the review. It wasn't an ideal time to be dealing with a JLARC study for them, but they were always professional and accommodating. I also want to thank all the school divisions who assisted. With that, I'll turn it over to Justin Brown, who oversaw the study. Justin?
And Hal, I might just interject again to re-emphasize what Nathan has to say. As you know, customarily, when the staff makes its presentation, it periodically pauses at an appropriate time for questions. If you want to ask a question, please wait for that pause. Turn on your mic, address me to be recognized, and we'll recognize you then for your questions. So don't interrupt the presentation. Just use the pause period for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just briefly, Chairman Plum, before I turn it over to Joe McMahon, as Hal said, we view this as a fairly positive report for DOE. I did want to say that our written report has quite a bit of detail on what they're doing well, including some of the areas that they had identified themselves as needing improvement prior to or even during our review. But in the interest of time, we've asked Joe to give you the highlights of that, but spend most of the time on the areas where we're making recommendations. And I close by saying that some of the recommendations we have would require additional staffing for DOE to implement. And we do this being very mindful of the challenging budgetary environment the state is in right now, but did want to document those needs for you if you found some ways to appropriate funds as they become available. So with that, I'll turn over to Joe for the presentation.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Justin. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name is Joe McMahon, and as the project leader for JLARC's review of the Virginia Department of Education. Maria Garnett and Danielle Childress worked with me on this review. And again, we'd like to thank DOE leadership and staff for all the assistance and cooperation over the course of this past year. It has been a very challenging time in education. Here are the key topics from our study mandate. As you can see, we were asked to conduct a broad review of DOE operations. This study is separate from the JLARC review of special education in Virginia, which will be briefed to this commission in December. We completed various research activities. Some of the primary methods included interviews with agency staff, school division staff, and other stakeholders and subject matter experts, data and document analysis, and several surveys. To briefly summarize the results of our review, we found that DOE is generally well managed. School divisions and other key stakeholders view the agency positively and note recent improvements. DOE's supervision of division compliance with state standards is efficient, but heavily relies on self-certification and lacks independent verification or thorough monitoring of corrective action. DOE provides adequate support to school divisions in most areas. However, the agency's support for low-performing schools and teacher recruitment and retention should be improved and could benefit from additional staffing. Today's presentation will be broken into 6 sections, and to echo a bit earlier, I'll pause at the end of each of those sections for questions. The first here will be on agency background, spending, and staffing. DOE and the Board of Education oversee Virginia's public education system. The board is responsible for its general supervision, and the superintendent of public instruction leads the agency and is to conduct proper and uniform enforcement of the provisions of school laws. DOE has several major roles. The agency distributes more than $8 billion annually to school divisions and other education programs. They ensure local school division compliance with federal and state requirements, and staff provide support and technical assistance to school divisions. As for agency staffing and spending, they spent $72.3 million on central office operations in FY20. The largest areas of spending were instructional services and special education services. 58% of that spending is state general funds, most of the remainder being from federal sources. Most agency staff are in one of 2 main divisions. The first is budget, finance, and operations, the other being school quality, instruction, and performance. I'd like to note here that agency staff will increase substantially next year by about 160 as part of the transition of early childhood programs from the Department of Social Services to DOE. The agency's total spending has grown comparably to inflation during the past decade, up a total of 21% from FY11 to FY20. I'll note that this spending increase was less than both statewide general fund and non-general fund growth over the same time period. DOE's staffing has grown modestly over the past decade, increasing by about 5% to 343 staff in this most recent year. This growth is similar to that of school division staffing, which we feel is a good comparison because that's the main constituency that the agency supports. I'll note that agency staffing has not returned to pre-Great Recession levels, as it peaked at just over 400 in 2007, which is about 60 more than it has today. A key item to touch on early in the presentation is DOE's role in providing guidance to school divisions regarding COVID-19. During the year, the agency coordinated with the Governor's Office, Virginia Department of Health, and various task forces. They've posted extensive COVID-19 related questions and answers on their website across all topics of education, things like instruction, transportation, and school nutrition. They released an extensive guidance document in part to help divisions decide among options to reopen virtually, in person, or with a hybrid model. And finally, the agency has worked to make virtual learning content more widely available through Virtual Virginia, which is the state's online digital learning platform. School divisions reported that the agency's guidance was useful, but were less positive in the area of virtual learning. We surveyed divisions twice, once in May after schools closed and once again before reopening in August. Both times, a majority of divisions felt DOE's guidance was helpful, timely, and comprehensive. As of August, virtual learning was the one area where school divisions were less likely to rate DOE's efforts as helpful. As some background in that area of virtual learning, during the summer, DOE expanded the amount of content in Virtual Virginia to cover all core K-12 courses and made access to that content available to all public school teachers in the state. This goes along with efforts that were already underway to help teachers access and share virtual resources with one another. Despite the greater availability of content, divisions are still navigating challenges such as network infrastructure, teacher proficiency, and adult support at home for students. These aren't necessarily shortcomings of the agency, but have nonetheless negatively impacted public perception of virtual learning. That concludes that first section. I can pause here if there are any questions.
Hearing no questions, then we will go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. I'll now transition to agency management. First, staff are generally satisfied with the agency, but several staffing issues should be monitored closely. A strong majority of staff.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, excuse me. I was trying to cut in when you asked a question. I was trying to cut in and I could not.
Okay. Senator Sproul.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I want to know that of the 11 staff, senior staff members, a report gave, I want to know that they did not report they have any person of color on 11 senior staff members. Why is that? On top of the DOB, the recommendation relax lack of diversity on the BDOE executive team. Not a single person of color out of 11 senior staff members. Why is that?
It's, yeah, Senator Sproul, I am going to cover that here in a slide or two, but I can give an answer there. Basically, that was one of our findings, and that is something that we heard from staff at the agency during our survey and interview process, that was a concern, and how that reflects out to school divisions about what schools see from the agency and how the agency can potentially work with school divisions with a higher percentage of minority student population. And we did have a recommendation in that area that I'll cover on a slide coming here.
But I'm saying, I understand that overall. I'm talking about as far as the 11 senior staff members. Are you talking about as well? 11 senior staff members?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
And that senior staff is at the assistant superintendent level and higher is where we cut that off.
All right, thank you.
So a strong majority of staff responding to the JLARC survey were satisfied with their job, with the agency as an employer, and with their supervisor and agency senior leadership. These percentages are equal to one or more, or equal to or more positive than those seen in other agency reviews recently conducted by JLARC. Now, the first area to closely monitor is that even though staff turnover is currently low, several indicators suggest it could become a problem. More than 1/3 of staff reported that they had recently considered leaving the agency, most commonly citing workload and salary concerns. And about that same proportion will be eligible for retirement within 5 years. Further, staff are seeing increased workload due to the COVID-19 response and the agency's incoming early childhood responsibilities. Despite the concerns about workload, DOE does not track the number of additional hours being worked by their salaried staff. And to Senator Spruill's question here, another concern was that while agency staffing is relatively diverse, agency leadership lacks minority representation. 38% of DOE staff are racial minorities, which is comparable to a typical state agency. However, agency staff expressed concern that the lack of diversity in senior leadership, which we're defining here, as I said, is the assistant superintendent level and higher, that lack of diversity could hinder their ability to fully understand the challenges facing racial minority student populations. Agency leadership points to success in recruiting more diverse staff at the office director level, which is that one immediately below the agency's senior leadership, with the goal that internal candidates can ensure more diverse applicant pools for future senior leadership position openings. Our two recommendations in this area are the DOE should collect data on the total hours worked by salaried employees and use that data to assess and monitor staff workload. And the DOE should develop a plan to establish a more racially diverse applicant pool for future openings of senior leadership positions. Our next finding in the area of agency management is that DOE has largely addressed problems with its budget and finance operations, but is still working to improve IT security. The agency's finance and budget operations have improved substantially. APA reported numerous negative findings during the timeframe about 3 to 5 years ago. However, DOE has taken steps to address these problems, including creation of a new position, the Assistant Superintendent for Budget and Finance. It serves as an additional layer of oversight and management. They've also developed new standard operating procedures. APA staff indicate that these changes have led to major improvements. On the other hand, APA has cited the agency for numerous IT security concerns in recent years. DOE is in the process of addressing these concerns, but work remains to be done. To date, they've hired a new Chief Information Security Officer and are developing new policies and procedures. APA staff in the early process of their review view these efforts positively, and DOE leadership is optimistic that there will be improvement. That concludes another section, and I can pause here for questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes, good. Senator Norman.
I'm just curious, when I was looking over the commission draft and listening to the oral presentation, even though I was dual tasking, what involvement, if any, did the Secretary of Education have in this discussion, if at all?
In the report in general?
Yes, sir.
We spoke with the Secretary through an interview, as we would with really any study, talking to the Secretariat where the agency falls into under their purview. And beyond that, that core interview, just email correspondence back and forth on questions, and they had the opportunity to review the report as well. Kind of our standard procedure there.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, sir.
Senator Norman.
Did he offer any positive input or observations on the recommendations that you all have made?
Yeah, and the Secretary's office responded to the report that they had a chance to review during our exposure process, and just responded broadly with a positive response, not technical feedback or any critiques, but on a recommendation by recommendation level, we didn't get feedback at that level.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the awkwardness of the question, and I apologize to him, but it's probably the first time in my legislative career I've asked an awkward question. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Spruill again.
Senator Spruill.
I heard the recommendation as far as the question that I asked about. So how are we going to know? I'm hearing they give the recommendation, but how are we going to know whether or not the recommendation will be followed through with? And I'm concerned that there will be more senior members on the staff. So the recommendation is one thing, but how and when would I know? When will we know that they have followed through and there will be more people of color as far as on that senior staff? How would we know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, there's probably multiple ways we could do that. We have a standard process where we go through and ask agencies after we make recommendations about the status of those recommendations. So that will certainly occur through this. And I would say that over the years, for certain topics that are very important to JLARC membership broadly, or even individual members, we're more than happy to circle back with agencies specifically on the status of certain recommendations, and we'd be happy to work with you on a way to do that here. And perhaps the superintendent who's going to speak after Joe would maybe opine on that a little bit and offer up some things in the way of status as well.
Thank you so much.
Any
Mr.
other
Chairman,
questions?
this is Senator Locke.
Senator Locke.
If I may ask, is it the normal process that the secretary where the agency falls would give technical feedback on the reports?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, or maybe Hal can speak to this, but I think we've seen it vary quite a bit. Sometimes secretaries have fairly detailed technical comments, sometimes they do not. I think there's a lot of things that play into that. Hal, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but I think we've seen a wide range of technical comments over the years from
I would
secretaries.
agree. We generally give them the opportunity, but we don't expect them to necessarily. It's really their calls where they do it. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't.
Other questions? Good, Joe. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll move on now to key stakeholders' perceptions of DOE. Here we found that school divisions and other stakeholders have a positive view of the agency and note recent improvement. A vast majority of school divisions agree that agency staff are professional and respectful, were satisfied with their relationship with the agency, felt that the staff provide accurate information and answer questions in a timely manner. In addition, school divisions, other state agencies, and Board of Education members noted recent improvement at the agency, which we're defining here as within the last 3 years. For instance, 2/3 of school divisions reported their relationship with the agency has improved. Likewise, other agencies like SHEV and DSS that coordinate with DOE on shared programs indicated that the coordination was generally effective and has recently improved in many cases. And board members also noted recent improvement. That was a quick section. I can pause here again for questions.
Any questions? Hearing none.
Okay. I'll now move on to DOE's supervision and compliance activities. They're the primary agency responsible for supervising Virginia's public education system. In doing so, DOE oversees school divisions' compliance with federal and state requirements, to the biggest being the federal Every Student Succeeds Act and the standards of quality. Effectiveness in this area is critical for ensuring that Virginia's school divisions are adequately meeting these requirements that are intended to help ensure provision of a quality education. First, we found that DOE meets some, but not all criteria for effective supervision of school division compliance with standards. As you'll see here, the agency effectively fulfills several supervision criteria. However, there are other areas where DOE's supervision could be more effective. And I'll walk through those now. So first, DOE efficiently collects and reports data and information required for state and federal compliance. This includes the methods in which they collect data and the assistance they provide to school divisions for fulfilling that task. We go into more detail about these activities in the report. Likewise, here's a look at the level of positive feedback from school divisions in this area. However, DOE doesn't fully meet all the criteria for effective supervision. A primary example of this is that DOE does not conduct verification of the information submitted by school divisions for many state standards. Instead, the agency primarily relies on divisions to self-certify whether they're in compliance. This approach is used on many key state requirements, such as the standards of quality, which means that divisions are attesting to whether they meet standards related to things like staffing ratios and instructional practices. As another example, self-certification is used for facility standards, which means divisions are self-attesting that all their school facilities meet state building requirements, as well as school-specific requirements, such as fire and emergency planning. These practices differ from many federal requirements where DOE staff do conduct verification of compliance through data and document review and site visits. DOE's reliance on this practice is technically consistent with law, which requires only that divisions self-certify their compliance with many state standards. It therefore has been a long-standing practice used by DOE across many agency leadership changes, often citing the fewer staffing resources required than would be needed to conduct additional verification or audits. However, the reliance on self-certification may not allow the agency or board to be fully aware of all cases of noncompliance, such as an incorrect compliance submission. I do want to caveat that statement to note that an incorrect submission of a report does not have to be intentional. It could also be the case of a division unknowingly being out of compliance with extensive or complex requirements. Further, when a school division fails to meet a standard, they are required to take corrective action to return their school to compliance. This corrective action can be as simple as hiring a new staff member in order to meet staffing ratios, or can be more complex, such as aligning curriculum to the standards of learning. However, DOE does not always monitor whether adequate corrective actions are being taken by school divisions in the cases of noncompliance with state standards. This lack of uniform and comprehensive monitoring of corrective action hinders the agency's ability to ensure school divisions are taking timely and effective action to return to compliance in all cases. As a result, we found that more comprehensive DOE supervision could be beneficial, especially for a subset of key state standards. A tangible example here could be to review that school divisions are not exceeding maximum class size limits spelled out in the standards of quality. While a more comprehensive supervisory approach for state standards would be a substantial change to longstanding DOE practices, using this type of approach for at least some standards seems reasonable for several reasons. It would hold school divisions more accountable for the substantial amount of funding the state provides. It would better ensure that school divisions are accurately assessing compliance with the complex and extensive standards that they must meet. And finally, compliance with these requirements is important as they are intended to ensure each child is receiving a safe and quality education. In this area, we have a recommendation that the General Assembly should direct DOE to implement a pilot program to more comprehensively supervise school division compliance with a subset of key state standards. One of the main benefits of taking this on as a pilot program that targets just a subset of standards would be to help determine the usefulness and cost effectiveness of the more comprehensive supervisory approach. That concludes that fourth section. I can pause for questions.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Auroch.
Delegate Auroch.
Chairman, yes, sir. I had one question. In the review, so far as verification on various standards, was consideration given to the periodic school studies that the Department of Education requires and the study teams that come in? I know that's a very thorough and intensive process. Was consideration given as to how effectively that is addressing any deficiencies at the local level?
Yeah, I think Delegate Auroch's referring to the school efficiency reviews. And yeah, I think there would be a way where this type of verification or follow-up on corrective action could be worked into that process. But at the same time, yeah, I think what we're envisioning is a structured approach where a certain number of standards or certain type of standards get reviewed across a sample or subset of schools. So it could be done independently, but I think it could also be incorporated into that as well.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Delegate Auroch.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what I'm referencing, I know right now every school has a periodic self-study and then a review team that comes in from other divisions with DOE representation, and it's incredibly broad in its evaluation of various teaching materials, but also of everything that's involved in the school facility. They don't typically go to every school in the division, but they hit a sampling of them in period over a course of time. They will end up typically in every school division. I'm curious as to how that is not sufficient to address the issues of concern. And secondly, given that all school divisions, their buildings have to comply with local building inspections, fire inspections, things of that nature. I know as an example, when I was teaching, there was one occasion when graduation ceremony was delayed approximately a half hour to an hour until the fire marshal was satisfied that the seating in the facility had been altered sufficient to meet fire code. Just curious how more bureaucracy is going to resolve that issue.
Yeah, and that's those are very good points, and I'd have to look at those school kind of peer reviews that you were discussing to know exactly what goes into them. I think what we're envisioning here is actually less intrusive than that in-depth process there. Some of this could be done most likely with existing data that's already collected by the agency, whether it's just through taking different looks at the data or doing additional analysis on the data that exists, or by targeted site visits and follow-ups.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate O'Rourke. Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McPike.
Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question to Mr. McMahon, I appreciate the work on it. I was looking at the comparative charts you have in the summary in comparison to Kentucky and North Carolina in regards to OSQ. Right now, Virginia has 12 staff. Intuitively, you'd think Kentucky is doing very well, but I'm not sure that 73 staff to 58 schools is also a good ratio. It seems like you're trying to sort of draw out a pilot or a means to triage. Can you speak to a little bit of the comparison of states? Additionally, I'm not sure if you can speak to, Virginia has listed in this report 262 schools. Is that the identified substandard number of schools that the staff works on? Is the eligible greater or less than? Can you speak to that so we can understand as a committee sort of what is the relative workload relative to its staffing and what you're recommending?
Yep. Senator McPike, I'm actually going to cover a lot of those questions here in this next section. So if you don't mind, I'll go through that and then we can circle back and see.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sufficiently answered and what I have not.
Other questions? If not, Joe, go ahead.
So this next section that we'll be moving on to is we'll cover DOE's school improvement function and the other support activities it provides to schools and divisions. First, school divisions are generally satisfied with support and technical assistance provided by DOE. As you can see here, most divisions agree that DOE provides effective support and assistance in several key instructional and non-instructional areas. Some examples include preparing students for post-graduation, conducting standardized tests, and designing and implementing school safety measures. Moving on to our next set of findings, DOE's school improvement program operated by the Office of School Quality has had limited effectiveness and has been under-resourced. They're in the process of changing the model for working with schools and divisions needing improvement. As some background, the school improvement process is meant to provide support and assistance for the state's most challenged schools, and staff in the Office of School Quality are responsible for implementing this process. Over the course of our research, divisions with schools participating in school improvement and OSQ staff cited concerns about the school improvement model. Only half the divisions agreed that the assistance from the office was effective, often describing it as overly compliance-based. OSQ staff also cited problems with the school improvement model, sharing how the support was not differentiated and may not be the right type of assistance for schools. And finally, staff in the office were dissatisfied with their role at the agency overall. That being said, DOE has identified many of these issues and is already changing its school improvement model. They're adapting it to feature more tailored coaching and assistance based on specific school circumstances. The new model was piloted with 4 divisions in February of 2020, but had to be paused due to the pandemic. DOE plans to use the pilot results to inform how to improve the program. As part of this change, we found that effectively strengthening the school improvement program will require careful transition planning and additional staffing. Implementation of the new school improvement model will require effective planning, and that this plan should guide the transition from the prior to the new model, estimate how many additional OSQ staff are needed to fully support the schools in the improvement program, and identify additional challenges to school improvement, such as the impact of COVID-19 on student achievement. More individualized and tailored support will likely require additional staffing in order to fully realize its benefits. OSQ's limited staffing was cited by the agency and school divisions as reasons for ineffectiveness of previous efforts. In the next few slides, I'll be talking about the ratio of schools in the improvement program to the number of staff in the Office of School Quality to illustrate workload. The Office of School Quality currently serves 262 schools with 12 staff. That's a ratio of 22 schools per 1 staff member. This unfavorable ratio is further exacerbated by the new state accreditation system, which targets additional areas for improvement, thus further increasing workload. At the current levels, OSQ staff only have about 2 weeks per school per year to learn about its unique challenges, provide support and identify strategies to be used, observe the implementation of those strategies, and to monitor progress and provide feedback. Virginia provides fewer state staff to work with low-performing schools than its neighboring states. North Carolina has about the same number of schools participating in school improvement, but they have 32 staff compared to Virginia's 12, resulting in a more manageable ratio of 8 schools to be supported by each staff member. As pointed out a little bit earlier, Kentucky has a similar number of schools participating and actually has a Department of Education staff member housed at each one of those schools for an approximately 1-to-1 ratio. Even a modest increase in OSQ staffing would result in substantially more time that could be devoted towards working with each low-performing school. So in the middle section of this figure here, you can see that just 5 more staff would reduce the workload to 15 schools per person, allowing each to spend about 3 weeks of the year providing customized support for each of those schools. A larger increase of 15 additional staff would cut the ratio to just 10 schools per person, allowing about 5 weeks of time to be dedicated to supporting each school. Our next finding is that DOE could be directed to consistently implement an effective school improvement program to ensure that low-performing schools are receiving beneficial state support over the long run. Therefore, the Code of Virginia should require DOE to operate an effective school improvement program. This clear statutory direction could ensure that DOE is responsible for developing and implementing an effective program and performing ongoing evaluation of that program. Also, clear direction would ensure that DOE consistently maintains school improvement as a priority in the future. If given additional resources and statutory direction for school improvement, DOE may need an added authority to hold school divisions accountable for improving performance in certain circumstances. In Virginia's locally administered school system, final decisions on instructional, personnel, and operational matters still rest with the local school board. Greater state authority could be used as a last resort to help ensure that chronic low performance in some divisions and schools is being fully addressed in certain circumstances, such as cases of pervasive low performance or ineffective local efforts. A 2014 JLARC report on low performing schools recommended changes to code and the Virginia Constitution to give the state more authority to override certain local decisions regarding low performing schools, but those recommendations have not yet been or were not implemented. The extent of additional intervention could vary, ranging from something fairly small, like teacher and principal assignments, to a bigger intervention, such as input into school central office personnel decisions. We have several recommendations related to this topic. First, DOE should develop and implement a plan to guide its transition to a new school improvement model and estimate the additional staffing required to effectively implement it. We feel that the General Assembly should appropriate additional funding for new staff positions in the Office of School Quality as state funding becomes available. And the General Assembly may wish to amend the Code of Virginia to require DOE to develop, implement, and evaluate an effective school improvement program. This isn't a section end, but that was a lot of material there, so I can pause for questions.
Senator McPike, would you like to renew your question?
I'll do some follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'll follow up at a later time.
Okay. Other questions or discussion?
Okay.
It looks like we can go forward.
Yep, moving on. Our next finding is that the state role in helping divisions recruit and retain teachers is fragmented and under-resourced. Virginia has an ongoing teacher shortage. Having a sufficient number of qualified teachers has been shown to be one of the most important factors in providing a quality education. With that in mind, 1% of teaching positions statewide are unfilled and 7% of teachers are provisionally licensed. While those statewide percentages might seem small, the proportion of unfilled positions in provisional licensure is larger in some divisions, as seen here. This may result in school divisions having to increase class sizes or rely on provisionally licensed teachers that lack at least some of the qualifications required for full licensure, such as post-undergraduate coursework, student teaching experience, or successful completion of assessments. Teacher recruitment and retention was one of the most common areas in which school divisions desired more support and assistance from DOE. Only half of school divisions reported that the agency's current efforts are effective. And teacher recruitment and retention is one of the top priorities identified by the board in its current comprehensive plan. Next, DOE's data collection and reporting does not fully convey divisions' recruitment and retention needs. That's because it focuses on teacher shortages at the statewide aggregate. This does not offer full insight into shortages in small divisions across geographic regions and specific subject areas. Reporting the teacher shortage in the aggregate also doesn't offer insight into the proportion of teacher vacancies in certain areas. And furthermore, the teacher exit questionnaire that is meant to gather data about why teachers are leaving is not widely administered. Next, mentorship and support is a critical component for teacher retention. For Virginia's teacher mentorship program for new teachers, DOE provides minimal and outdated guidance to be used by program participants. Further, the program's $1 million in total funding is distributed based on the number of new teachers that a division has, rather than targeting the divisions with the greatest retention problems. And those, as you can see by this table, are often not the same divisions. DOE should strengthen its teacher recruitment and retention efforts. The Office of Teacher Education, which has primary responsibility in this area, currently has just 3 staff. And I'll note that we found that the shortcomings discussed here are a reflection of a lack of staffing resources rather than on the quality of those existing staff. Other states provide more assistance to divisions for teacher recruitment and retention. Kentucky has a state initiative to attract new teachers and provide resources and training. North Carolina has staff to support new teacher programs and research teacher workforce policy. Approximately 3 additional DOE staff could increase the agency's effectiveness in this area. For example, the office could help with recruiting individuals into the teaching profession or teacher preparation programs, create a single statewide job application for teaching positions, add support for existing offerings like the teacher mentorship program, and better analyze teacher shortage and turnover data. We have 2 recommendations to address these findings. DOE should improve state efforts to help divisions recruit and retain teachers by conducting more useful data collection and analysis and more effectively administering the teacher mentorship program. We have policy options here as well. DOE could give the Office of Teacher Education a stronger role in helping divisions in recruiting and retaining teachers. To do so, the General Assembly could appropriate additional funding for 3 additional staff in the Office of Teacher Education as state funding becomes available. Please keep in mind that regardless of how effective the state's role becomes in this area, there will likely continue to be impediments to teacher recruitment and retention from factors such as teacher pay and their working environment. That concludes this section, and I can pause again.
Questions? All right, Joe, I think you wind it up.
Finally, we'll move on to the Board of Education. Here we found that board members have a productive relationship with agency staff and that additional requirements could help ensure board membership has necessary expertise and regional representation. First, board members are highly engaged in their work and have a productive and well-managed relationship with DOE staff, citing sufficient support and a good relationship with agency leadership and the Director of Board Relations. Current board members have a wide range of useful expertise and experience. However, the only code requirement is for 2 board members to have experience in private industry. There are no requirements related to expertise in certain educational or other areas. This is despite the board having responsibilities in specific areas of education, such as also serving as the state's career and technical education board, as well as overseeing early childhood programs beginning next year. There's also no requirement that the board have regional representation. As a result, the current board membership represents just half of the state's 8 superintendent regions, and half of board members are from a single region. Although the board, as currently composed, is productive and effective, there can be value in different perspectives, whether from diverse types of expertise or geographic representation. Therefore, we have 2 policy options that would help ensure relevant expertise and representation of membership. The General Assembly could require the membership of the board to include expertise in local government, career and technical education, or early childhood development, as well as represent at least 5 of the state's 8 superintendent regions. I'll again summarize our key findings from our report. DOE is generally well managed. School divisions and other key stakeholders view the agency positively and note recent improvements. DOE's supervision of division compliance with state standards is efficient, but heavily relies on self-certification and lacks independent verification or thorough monitoring of corrective actions. DOE provides adequate support to school divisions in most areas. However, the agency's support for low-performing schools, as well as teacher recruitment and retention, should be improved and could benefit from additional staffing. That concludes my prepared remarks, and I'm happy to take questions on any part of the report at this time.
Okay, members, that's the report. Are there questions? Hearing none, then Director Greer, we can move on to hear from Dr. James Lee, the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Dr. Lee, are you, I see you are, sir. Virginia is for learners. Now,
yes, sir.
Dr. Lane, let me just say in advance, we have a limited amount of time, but I want you to address the commission. We have a 100-page report about your department, and it is extremely positive. There are some recommendations that I suspect, and I read from your letter that you go along with. I would also point out to you that seldom does the commission come back and talk about additional staffing, so don't talk yourself out of that recommendation that you might need some additional help. But having said that, then, though, I do want to put in context the fact that you are making some amazing progress, and we'd love to hear from you further. Dr. Lane.
Thank you, Delegate Plum, Senator Howell, members of the commission. I want to thank JLARC for the opportunity to work on this in the past year, and have truly enjoyed the process. I do have a quick presentation, and Delegate Plum, I promise it will be just about 5 minutes.
Thank you.
So our vision at the agency is that we will maximize the potential of every child in the Commonwealth. And we do that in the 4 ways listed here. But at the center of our work is this focus on equity, that we can make sure that students' background is not a predictor of their outcomes. And so this focus on equity and making sure that we truly maximize the potential of every child is what really drives our work. So that no matter where they're from, no matter what their race, gender, zip code, ability, socioeconomic status, or language spoken at home, we can make sure that they have a great life when they leave our schools. I'm going to focus on 4 areas in the JLARC report, and the first is on agency management. Diversity, equity, and inclusion remain a priority. We will make sure that over time we recruit and retain a much more diverse leadership. We have done that at the leadership level, which is at the director level. And the idea that we put in place there is that if we could have more internal staff that are from diverse backgrounds, then when we go to recruit for assistant superintendent and deputy superintendent positions, we will have staff ready to move up. We did hire at the agency only the 2nd African-American assistant superintendent in the history of the Commonwealth's Education Department, but that staff member left for a better job, higher paying job within a year. We have also created a position for a director of equity. We've been doing anti-racism and inclusion training with all of the staff to prepare them to meet the challenges of ensuring that we can make sure that every student, no matter who they are, can be supported, and that our staff is representative of that. And so I know Senator Spruill asked that question. I will state to you that we will continue to make that a priority. When this JLARC report was commissioned, we had a number of significant APA findings, and I'm happy to report that at least on the finance side of the house, we have eliminated all of those. And as you mentioned before, staffing levels continue to hinder some progress in some areas. But we do have a new strategic plan that we developed at the agency. We've already placed all of the JLARC recommendations into our strategic plan, and we'll make sure that we move forward on all of those matters. Here is a picture of our strategic plan, and you can see here where we've already embedded many of the recommendations directly into the strategic plan. On the standards of quality and the compliance, it's important to note that the agency does provide a lot of technical assistance on standards of quality compliance. We do it throughout the year, and we do it in a coaching way so that by the time that they get to the self-certification, we have helped school divisions come in or out of compliance and back in as time goes on. To do the level of independent verification requested in the JLARC report, it will take a significant amount of additional resources, and we really don't have a lot of evidence that a lot of our school divisions are out of compliance. And so we'll have to balance the need to do independent verification with actually the benefit of not knowing whether we're actually have an issue in compliance with our school divisions. And anecdotally, with the work that we do with them throughout the year, most school divisions are focused on compliance by the time they get to self-certification. In school quality, as you saw, there were significant staffing differences between some of our adjacent states, but we have had some success in this area. Alexandria City now has all of their schools accredited for the first time in the history of the school division. Franklin County was one of our MOU school districts, which is a school district that has significant challenges. That should say actually Franklin City, I apologize, that's a typo. Franklin City is now no longer in our school improvement process. And when I came to the DOE 2 years ago, this was an area I wanted to improve. I experienced the school quality program as a superintendent in a local school district. I knew we could do more to help school divisions get better. We did implement our model. We do have new standards of accreditation, and we thought that this year you would see great benefits from that. But with COVID and the cancellation of the tests, it will be next year before we can show you the outcomes of this new model. But I wanted to show you a little bit about the accreditation system because it's important to understand that in context to see why we're doing what we're doing. The new accreditation system based school improvement on whether you now have a level 3 indicator. I won't go into detail on how to do that, but that essentially amounts to about 200 schools with a level 3 indicator, and then there are 60 more that we identified through other factors. Here is what that looks like on a map of Virginia. The green school divisions have no schools with level 3 indicators and therefore do not enter our school improvement program. But the yellow, orange, and red are the school divisions that have level 3 indicators. You can see that we're working with school divisions all throughout the Commonwealth. It's important to understand this in the context of the old system. The former system only allowed corrective action plans when we got to a point that a school was denied accreditation. And it sometimes would take us 4 years before we began working with a school district. Now, as soon as they hit level 3, we begin working with them. And you can see that we are now doing corrective action plans in all of these school districts. And our support is more timely. This is a school we may not have worked with in the past, but you can see that the school division was doing some of their own work to approve in the first 3 years of this example. You see here that as soon as a school division hits a level 3 in red, we're immediately getting into corrective action. And the idea would be that our corrective action would get them out of the system immediately. As far as teacher recruitment and retention, this remains a national challenge. Certainly teacher pay is at the heart of this issue, and I know it's something that the General Assembly wrestles with all of the time, and we thank you for your work in that space, and encourage and strongly advise that we continue to beef up our efforts there, and really appreciate the work that you've done, especially with licensure flexibility and the money that you gave us last year to automate our licensure system. That goes live middle of next year based on the investment that you gave us last year, but teachers, even out of state, have to apply for licenses through a paper process and by paying check. We will now be able to have an online process and accept credit card payments, which will make it a much more efficient process and allow us to reach out to more and more teachers all throughout the nation. And so that is quickly our 5-minute response. Again, we concur with the recommendations. We will do everything that is required of us to be the maximum agency that we can be. And I want to thank JLARC for all the time that they spent with us during the pandemic. Many of our school divisions were surveyed in May, and you can imagine what that was like. And just a thank you to Dr. Greer and everyone at JLARC.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. Are there questions of the superintendent?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Norman.
Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Lane, I noted that you said that you were hiring a diversity officer. That might be a different term than you had, and I think that's certainly appropriate. But my question is, have you all been working at all with Mrs. Underwood, who is in the governor's team of diversity?
Yes, sir, Senator Norman, our director of equity and community engagement works very closely with her. We've served on a number of committees and commissions together, and have found her technical assistance to be very helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Delegate Austin.
Delegate Austin.
Mr. Chairman, where can we obtain a copy of the plan that Dr. Lane just presented to us?
I bet he'll send us one. And he ought to include a bumper sticker with it. Dr. Lane, did you?
I think we can do so.
We can send that to the members of the commission. We'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions or discussion? Hearing none, it's appropriate then that we receive the usual motion to receive the report. So what's the motion?
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 The report is received. Thanks again to staff and to Dr. Lane for an excellent report. It gives us a sense of direction, and our kids are a most important product, and recognize now when we're talking about Department of Education, we're essentially talking about early childhood through 12th grade, no longer K-12. So it becomes even more important. So thank you all for that today. Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda is our update on VITA's implementation of a new multi-supplier model for the provision of IT infrastructure services for the state. We're pleased to be able to report that much positive progress has been made since we last briefed you on this. I want to thank Nelson Moe and his staff for their full cooperation during our review. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kimberly Sartay, who oversaw this review. Kimberly?
Thank you, Hal. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to remind the Commission that this work has been undertaken as part of JLARC's ongoing oversight of VITA, which is required under the Appropriation Act. As Hal mentioned, the current review is an update to our last year's review, so we have now spent a couple of years reviewing this transition in depth. Last year's report was not particularly glowing, as you may recall. We found that the implementation of the model had been delayed, and we identified numerous concerns and shortcomings related to VITA's management of the model. But as Hal indicated, VITA has addressed many of the concerns identified last year, so we certainly have a more positive report for you this year. Still, there are areas where VITA needs to continue improving, particularly regarding the quality of services provided by its private suppliers and its focus on its customers. So at this time, I would like to introduce Jamie Bitts, who will brief you on the findings and recommendations from the current study.
Sorry, Jamie, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and members of the commission. As Kimberly said, my name is Jamie Bitts, and I'll be presenting the findings and recommendations from our follow-up review on VITA's implementation of its multi-supplier model. Nick Galvin worked with me on this review, and I want to thank him for all of his hard work. This was an update of last year's study, and the update focused on 4 key topics, and those are listed on the slide here. And just to briefly summarize our findings, we found that VITA has completed its implementation of the multi-supplier service model and improved its management of that model and supplier contracts. Agencies are more satisfied with VITA's infrastructure services, but they do remain dissatisfied with network services and the resolution of service incidents. And the majority of agencies don't agree that VITA is sufficiently focused on their customer needs and that VITA should more proactively address agency concerns with its services. We made 12 recommendations in last year's report across the topics listed here on the slide. And at this point, every recommendation that we made is either fully or partially implemented. Mr. Chairman, I have 4 parts to my presentation this morning, and I'll start first with some very brief background information on VITA's multi-supplier model. VITA provides infrastructure services to a total of 65 state agencies. Those include PCs and laptops, network services, including internet and phone, and then email services. The vast majority of VITA's budget goes toward providing infrastructure services for agencies, and just 3 agencies account for more than 40% of annual spending on infrastructure services. Now, as you may already know, VITA transitioned to a multi-supplier service model in 2018. It now has contracts with 8 separate suppliers, 1 for each of its infrastructure services that it provides. And one of those suppliers acts as an integrator and is responsible for coordinating the services of the other suppliers. And Mr. Chairman, I'll pause briefly to see if there's any questions at this point.
Questions at this point? Becky, can go ahead.
And if not, I'll turn to the implementation status of VITA's multi-supplier model. Now, VITA completed implementation of the multi-supplier model after delays in 2018 and 2019. And at the same time, it was providing critical assistance for agencies during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, implementation of the model was significantly delayed last year, but VITA completed implementation this past April. As a result, it now has at its disposal a number of tools that it can use to better manage the model. And probably the most important of those is a reporting tool that it can use to monitor supplier performance each month. Now, VITA has also provided assistance to support agencies during the pandemic, and this was mainly to help them shift to a largely remote workforce. And more than 75% of agencies we surveyed said that they were satisfied with VITA's assistance here. And again, Mr. Chairman, I'll pause briefly to see if there's any questions. And if not, I'll turn to VITA's management of the multi-supplier model and its contracts with suppliers. Now, we found a number of serious problems with VITA's contract management last year, and that included not holding suppliers accountable for meeting performance requirements in the contracts. This year, we found that VITA has improved its management of supplier contracts and of the overall multi-supplier model. VITA is now consistently enforcing the contract's performance requirements, and those are the service levels that suppliers have to meet on a monthly basis. As of this past June, it was enforcing 97% of those requirements. This slide just describes for you how VITA is more effectively managing contractual deliverables and obligations compared to last year. These are now being consistently tracked, and VITA is also more consistently addressing late and rejected deliverables. Last year, we found that VITA wasn't effectively managing its issue resolution platform, which is used to address more complex service issues. Several improvements have been made to the platform since then. Additional staff have been added, and additional policies have been implemented. The number of unresolved issues has decreased substantially since then, but it's still taking too long to address platform issues. The additional staff and policies are fairly recent changes, and so we do think there's value in waiting to see if the number of unresolved issues continues to decline through the rest of this year. And so we have a recommendation in the report that at the end of 2020, the VITA should assess the platform to determine if issues are being resolved faster, and if not, work with its integrator to assign additional platform staff and modify policies. We also found that VITA made organizational changes that have helped improve its management of the model, but that it hasn't conducted a comprehensive assessment of its organizational structure and staffing as we had recommended last year. Last year, VITA created the position of Chief Operating Officer, and they filled it with someone who has previous experience managing multi-supplier models. And the current COO has undertaken a number of initiatives to improve VITA's management of the model, and several of those are listed here on slide 19. As I mentioned a minute ago, we recommended that VITA conduct a comprehensive review of its structure and staffing. VITA has developed a 5-year planning process that addresses some aspects of our recommendation, but it's not looking at whether it has the right number of staff in each of its areas. And it's also not looking at whether there are additional changes to its structure that are needed. And we think that doing that kind of comprehensive review is critical, given the significant change to the model over the past several years, as well as to sustain the improvements that VITA has made over this past year. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause again just to see if there are any questions at this point.
Hearing none.
And next, Mr. Chairman, I'll talk about the quality of VITA's infrastructure services. Now, last year, we found that many agencies were dissatisfied with those services, and they were particularly concerned about network connectivity and the resolution of service incidents, which are outages or service disruptions. This year, we found improvements in supplier performance and agency satisfaction with VITA's services, but many agencies are still concerned about the quality of the network, as well as the resolution of service incidents. This slide shows you that satisfaction with almost all of VITA's services increased between 2019 and 2020, including with services overall. Now, despite those improvements, less than half of the agencies that we surveyed said that services are of sufficient quality or reliability. In looking at VITA's network services, its network supplier has improved their performance, but network connectivity is still a problem for many agencies. Close to a third of the agencies we surveyed said they were dissatisfied with the network. And as you might imagine, poor network quality can have a significant impact on agencies' day-to-day operations. To give you one example, staff with one agency complained of slow network connections that at times made it difficult to access simple web pages for their work. And at times, as a result, staff had to use their personal cell phones to access those pages. VITA should be providing information on a regular basis to agencies about the network and its performance. As the service provider, it's ultimately responsible for ensuring adequate connectivity. And agencies rely almost entirely on VITA for information about the network, including the centralized portion that VITA maintains, as well as the portions of the network that agencies are responsible for. So we have two recommendations to address this. One is that VITA should provide quarterly network assessments to each of its customer agencies. And two, that the General Assembly could direct VITA to report annually on whether the network overall is adequate to meet agencies' needs. Agencies also remain concerned about VITA's resolution of service incidents. Just a little over a quarter of them said that incidents are being resolved to their satisfaction, and less than 20% said they were being resolved in a timely manner. Now, there's been some improvement here since last year. Suppliers are meeting more performance requirements for resolving incidents within a specified time period, but they're still consistently missing two other performance requirements. One is a requirement that there not be any incidents that take longer than 30 days to fix. And the other is a requirement that there not be any incident tickets that have to be reopened. Less than 1% of incidents take longer than 30 days, but that 1% represented more than 1,600 incidents this past year. Nearly every agency experienced at least one of those incidents, and about a quarter of them had an average of one of those incidents per month. Now, extended service outages can have a significant negative impact on agencies. To give you an example of this, in July of last year, the Department of Transportation lost internet service at near a field office due to a lightning strike. It took VITA and its suppliers 47 days to restore service. And during that time, Department of Transportation staff had to drive to another field office to do their work. And one of the key factors causing delays in resolving service incidents is that incident tickets are often routed to the wrong supplier, and sometimes several times. And this slide is just showing you that incidents that have to be rerouted are generally taking longer to fix. Now, given the delays in resolving many incidents, we think VITA should work with its suppliers to develop improvement plans to better ensure that incidents don't take more than 30 days to fix, and that there aren't incident tickets that have to be reopened. In the past year, VITA has used improvement plans to increase supplier compliance in a number of areas, and we think that approach should be taken here. So we have two recommendations to that effect. One is that VITA should implement performance improvement plans to address the resolution of service incidents. And second, that these plans should require suppliers to substantially reduce the number of incidents that have to be rerouted. And finally, while VITA has finished implementing the multi-supplier model and improved how it's managing that model, it's not sufficiently focused on meeting the needs of its customer agencies. The vast majority of agencies don't agree that VITA is sufficiently focused on their customer needs. Just a little over 20% of agency staff said that VITA was sufficiently customer focused. And that's a concern because meeting agencies' needs is obviously critical when they're required to receive their IT services from VITA. A strong focus on customer needs is also important because the performance requirements in the contracts may not adequately ensure that agencies' needs are being met. As you can see on slide 36, suppliers are meeting relatively high percentages of performance requirements in the contracts, even though agency satisfaction with services is substantially lower in most cases. Now, VITA needs to be more proactive in addressing agencies' concerns with their services. One way to do that is through regular customer satisfaction surveys. The two other states with multi-supplier models, Georgia and Texas, both survey agencies about their satisfaction with each of the services they're receiving, and they're also regularly following up with agencies that express any dissatisfaction. VITA does do some customer satisfaction surveys now, but they're not asking agencies about each of the services they're receiving, and they're not regularly following up with agencies when they express concerns. And so we have two recommendations to that effect. The first is that VITA should conduct at least annual surveys of agency satisfaction that ask about services overall, as well as each of those suppliers' services. And the second is that VITA should implement a process to more proactively use the survey results to address agency dissatisfaction. Mr. Chairman, slide 39 just summarizes our key findings. In the interest of time, I won't read through these. But I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that there may be.
Okay, we're open now to questions to Jamie. Hearing no questions, Hal, we have also a representative of VITA to speak with us.
That's correct. Nelson Moe is here, I believe.
Ms. Moe, are we connected?
Chair Plum, can you hear me?
Hey, we can hear you well. Why
Great.
don't you go ahead and take your time, and then we'll see if we have any further discussion.
Yes, sir. Chair Plum, Vice Chair Howell, and members of the commission. Good morning. I'm Nelson Moe. I'm the Chief Information Officer of the Commonwealth and the agency head for VITA agency head for VITA. Thank you for the opportunity and to address you briefly today. Thank you again to Hal, Kimberly, Jamie, and Nick, and everyone else who had a role in this follow-up report, and including many members of my staff to put time and energy into it to generate this comprehensive review. I'm gratified that the report recognizes and details the tremendous progress we made at VITA over the past year. When we became VITA over 16 years ago, we were pioneering new technologies, new ways of doing business, and charting new territory in our industry. And as you know, no industry moves and changes faster than IT. And just like technology, we found an ever-present need to evolve, adapt, and innovate to our changing virtual environment and digital landscape. Over the past 6 years, our agency has undergone a major transformation in service delivery, transformative in that it fundamentally changes how we serve the Commonwealth. 2 years ago, we shifted from a single service provider to a multi-supplier model, which provides the Commonwealth the best of breed suppliers for each service area. This shift has allowed us unprecedented ability to provide state-of-the-art services for our customers. We can broker and build a diverse portfolio, adapt to the changing marketplace, and provide better visibility into the program level services to optimize Virginia's return on investment. The implementation of the new multi-supplier model is not complete, but as the report says, VITA's work goes on. We are committed to continuous improvements in our service model and partnerships with our customers. We are implementing new cloud technology and transitioning to a new data center, which is currently ahead of schedule, all while continuing to pursue delivery of innovative, efficient, and secure technology services for our customers. As you know, this year, the Commonwealth has faced the unprecedented challenge of COVID-19. And through our model, VITA and our suppliers were able to support Virginia's emergency response and ensure that agencies continue to provide their critical services to Virginia citizens. We quickly deployed new equipment, new technology, and additional resources to help our agencies nimbly and smoothly adapt to remote work. We are proud of the role in our role in keeping the Commonwealth moving forward, and I firmly believe that these positive outcomes are a testament to the success of the Commonwealth's new model and its ability to meet Virginia's evolving technology needs. We hope the Commonwealth meet the challenges presented by COVID-19 while transforming our own organization. Over the past year, we've established a strong foundation within our organization as we advance and optimize our new service model for our customers. We rebuilt our human resources division and with a focus on instituting an organizational workforce development program. We built new business units to manage the multi-supplier model, our post-award contract management group, and our enterprise project management team, for example. And we launched a new agency strategic plan to focus on continuous improvement. We modernized our communication strategy to be customer-centric, transparent, and with a proactive approach. We did this to build to build on critical customer relationships and improve our ability to communicate effectively both internally and externally. Now that we have that foundation laid, our next step will be to perform the comprehensive organizational assessment approved by JLARC, or recommended by JLARC staff. During this fiscal year, we'll be working closely with an outside consultant with expertise in IT organizations to assess our agency and determine our needs going forward. This will set us on the path to realize our new vision, to be Virginia's most customer-focused technology partner, empowering the Commonwealth to achieve more through innovative, efficient, and secure technology. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to recognize my talented team, our people who make our work possible. They are dedicated and resilient. They've rallied together despite the pandemic to build momentum and propel us to national leadership in our new organizational space. They believe in the work that we do and are passionate about their public service to Virginia. I'd specifically like to recognize Virginia's Chief Operating Officer, John Ozevec. His experience in deploying the multi-supplier environments and efforts over the past year have been the key to our success, and there's more to come. Recently, VITA was named as a finalist for 3 national awards in 2 different award programs. 2 nominations were received from the National Association of Chief Information Officers for our achievements in pioneering a new method of state IT service delivery, the multi-supplier model, and improved cybersecurity risk management. We've also been recognized as a finalist for Best Overall Government Experience by the Center of Digital Government, which highlights our team's work to redesign the virginia.gov portal. We appreciate this recognition that the Commonwealth is a national leader in IT services and cybersecurity, and our fingers are crossed for the final award announcements later this month. This concludes my remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity to share VITA's story and progress today. My team and I are happy to speak with you at any time to discuss our work. And please do not hesitate to contact us.
Thank you, Mr. Moe. We have a motion to receive the report.
So moved.
So moved by Delegate Carr, second.
Second.
Second. Then all those in favor of the motion to receive the report will say aye.
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 Those no. The ayes have it. We have a report before us. And I want to say just a word about this. I've followed this process for 16 years. And I know a lot of people who've been with us from the very beginning know how torturous it has been from time to time. To Mr. Moe and his staff, congratulations on the progress you've made. But I have to say, in all sincerity, in a private sector, an organization that had the kind of responses that we're getting on the services that are provided would not be acceptable. We'd be bankrupt in no time if we had that level of service response. So we still got work to do. The organizational aspect of it's important, and that's why in JLARC we want to continue to maintain an oversight of that. And in that regard, Mr. Greer, I think you have a proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'll turn it back to Kimberly Sarte, who will bring to the Commission's attention a proposed motion for additional work by JLARC in this area. Kimberly?
Yes, and just to follow up on what the chairman said, given that this kind of comprehensive review has not yet been conducted, we think that a reasonable next step would be for JLARC to conduct this review as part of our ongoing and objective oversight. And we would certainly build on and not duplicate the work that VITA has already done in these areas. So while we can conduct this review under JLARC's existing authority, the Commission's approval of this more in-depth work would emphasize its importance and better ensure cooperation both from VITA and other state agencies. So Mr. Chairman, if you would like, I'm happy to read a motion for a study at this time.
Please go forward.
Okay, and I can put it on the screen. So in light of the Virginia Information Technology Agency's significant transition to a multi-supplier model, JLARC staff are directed to review VITA's organizational structure and staffing, including but not limited to 1, whether VITA is organized to ensure the current and future operational success of the new model. 2, whether VITA is appropriately staffed to carry out its responsibilities under the new model, including whether any existing staff should be repurposed. 3, VITA's ability to recruit and retain qualified staff and any factors affecting this. And 4, other relevant topics identified during the course of the review.
Do we have questions for members of the Commission on the motion? Hearing none, do I hear someone to move the motion?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor of the motion will say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Motion is agreed to. Thank you very much. Thank you to the staff and to VITA staff as well for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to another report from VITA about VITA next year, and hopefully be even more hopeful, more positive. Thank you. All right. How moving forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn it back over to Kimberly to introduce our next presenter.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I would next like to introduce Ellen Miller, who will briefly go over this year's annual state spending report, which covers fiscal years 2011 through fiscal year 2020. Ellen?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Let's see if okay. Again, I'm Ellen Miller, and I'll give you a brief presentation on our annual report on state spending. JLARC is required by the Code of Virginia to prepare an annual report on state spending. As Kimberly mentioned, this year's report covers spending trends over the 10-year period between fiscal year 11 and fiscal 20. Slide 3 provides a high-level picture of state spending for fiscal year 20. It shows the state budget is really concentrated in a small number of agencies. If you look at the left-hand side, you'll see that DMAS is the largest agency in terms of total appropriations. On the right-hand side, you'll see that the Department of Education is the largest agency for general fund appropriations. One thing that I'll quickly point out, and you may notice from the numbers that are on the slide, is the spending for fiscal year 20 does not include any of the coronavirus relief payments from the federal government. Slide 4 shows how the state budget has grown over the past 10 years. You look at the bottom line, this shows the trend in general fund appropriations, and they increased by about 4.2% per year on average over the 10-year period. Non-general funds, which is the green line in the middle, increased at a faster rate of about 6.3% per year on average. This slide just points out that many factors affect the growth of Virginia's state budget. Slide 6 shows budget growth when the impact of inflation and population growth are removed to help show real trends in spending. Most of the other tables and figures in the report and the presentation this morning show growth that is not adjusted for either inflation or population. However, when you control for both of these factors, the general fund budget grew by only about 2% per year on average during the 10-year period, which is slower than the non-general fund growth of about 4.1% per year. One factor that has contributed to slower general fund growth is that Virginia has experienced slower growth rates than the nation over the 10-year period for several economic indicators such as GDP, per capita income, and employment. My next few slides focus on growth in total appropriations by agency and program over the past 10 years. You can see that growth is fairly concentrated in a handful of agencies and programs, with 10 agencies accounting for 72% of total budget growth and 10 programs accounting for 70% of total budget growth. Slide 9 shows the top 10 agencies in terms of total growth. And as you can see, DMAS tops the list with a total budget that grew by an average of $844 million per year. DMAS has consistently been at the top of this list for the past 10 reports. VITA is also consistently on this list, and its total budget grew an average of $433 million per year over the time period. You'll notice that several higher education institutions are also on the list. And again, this is consistent with prior years. In fact, there's really only one agency that is new to this list, and it's the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, and because of increased spending for community-based care. Slide 10 shows the 10 programs with the highest growth in total appropriations. Not surprisingly, Medicaid tops the list, followed by highway construction programs. Nearly all of these top 10 programs are directly involved in the core government functions of healthcare, education, and transportation. The next few slides focus on growth in general fund appropriations over the 10-year period. You can also see that general fund growth is concentrated in a few agencies and programs. The top 10 agencies are shown here on slide 12. Again, DMAS tops the list with average annual growth of about $231 million per year during the 10-year period. Direct aid for K through 12 education comes in second again this year at $205 million in average annual growth. The new agency this year is the Department of Conservation and Recreation. It makes this list because of deposits to the Water Quality Improvement Fund. Slide 13 lists the top 10 programs in terms of general fund growth. Many of these programs, you'll notice, track very closely to the agencies on the prior slide. You'll see Medicaid program services and education programs top the list. Nearly all of these programs are directly related to healthcare, education, and public safety. Now I'll turn to non-general funds, which were responsible for 71% of total budget growth during the 10-year period. The non-general fund categories with the largest growth include federal trust, which includes funding for Medicaid, Commonwealth Transportation Fund, and Higher Education Operating Fund, which includes tuition and fee revenues. Dedicated special revenue, which includes funding, transportation-related funding for Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads transportation districts. That actually had the highest growth rate with a 17% growth over the 10-year period. Slide 15 just points out that there's a wide variety of revenues that are considered non-general funds. Some sources, such as college tuition payments And child support payments may not always be thought of as government revenue, but they do flow through the state budget, so increases in these payments also increase state appropriations. Slide 16 shows the 10 agencies with the highest growth amount in non-general fund appropriations. DMAS tops the list, followed by VITA. You'll also see several higher education institutions are also on the list, mostly because of tuition and fees and enrollment growth. The prior slides focused on budget growth in terms of the dollar amount. This slide points out that there were some agencies that had very large percentage increases in their budget since fiscal year 11, so their growth rates are large. We found that 22 agencies each had general fund growth rates that were higher than the growth rate for the general fund budget as a whole, which was 44% over the entire period. There were also 8 agencies that had non-general fund growth rates that were higher than the growth rate for the non-general fund budget as a whole, which was 71% over the period. As we have reported in the past, some agencies have experienced general fund declines over the 10-year period. This year, it was only 2 agencies that had experienced declines in their general fund appropriations. And this is mainly because in fiscal year 11, the general fund budget was still at a low point because of the Great Recession. There were also 3 other agencies that experienced general fund growth, but it was fairly low. It was lower than the rate of inflation since fiscal year 11. Mr. Chairman, the slide just briefly summarizes our key findings. I won't read them in the interest of time, but that does include my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions from members if there are any.
Questions of Ellen? You know, I always enjoy reading your reports because they have lots of little nuggets of information in them. And I want to point out to members that on page 4 of the report, key demographic and economic changes in Virginia, for the period 2011 to 2020, the total population growth was 5.6%. For those under age 18, it's less than 0.1%. But what I want to note is that for age 65 and over, the growth was 38.9%. So that's going to have major policy implications as we go forward. We're all getting older, whether we like to know it or not. So Ellen and Hal, thank you for that report. There's no necessity that we have a motion on it. It's one of our regular reports, but then how we want to move on to the next item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finally, we'd like to provide our brief update on Medicaid spending and enrollment. I turn it over to Tracy Smith, who oversees our Health and Human Resources Unit. Tracy?
Thanks, Hal. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Mr. Chairman, last year we presented a series of briefings to the Commission on various aspects of Medicaid, and that included how Medicaid expansion had impacted enrollment in the program as well as program spending. At that time, we hadn't experienced a full fiscal year under Medicaid expansion, and so we intended this year to be able to brief you on what a typical fiscal year under expansion might look like. However, as you'll see, the pandemic has had some significant and of course unexpected impacts on the program. And I will turn it over to Stephanie Papps, who will deliver the brief presentation to you today. Stephanie?
Okay. Good morning. Let's see. Okay. All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Stephanie Papps, and I worked with Jeff Lenardi this year on our annual update of Medicaid enrollment and spending. I'd like to thank Jeff for his work on this report, as well as DMAS and DSS for their cooperation. In this year's update, we addressed 3 basic questions related to Medicaid spending. How has spending grown over the past 10 years, and how does that compare to other states? How did actual spending compare to the forecast? And how did the economic conditions associated with the pandemic impact spending? Slide 3 lists our primary conclusions from this work. Spending growth in the program has been steady since 2010, ranking near the median of other states. Spending in 2020 was $558 million lower than forecast. This lower than anticipated spending was driven by less use of non-emergency services. And finally, the higher than expected enrollment increase appears to be due to factors associated with the pandemic. Slide 4 shows how spending has grown over the past 10 years. The dark blue top line shows total Medicaid spending over the past 10 years, which has grown by an average of 7.8% per year since fiscal year 2010. The dotted line shows what spending in the base Medicaid program looked like in 2019 and 2020. When Medicaid expansion is excluded, average annual growth in the base Medicaid program was 4.9% per year since fiscal year 10. The lighter blue line shows the growth in state funds. Over the past 10 years, the state funds have grown an average of 8.2% per year. In 2020, there was a reduction in state spending for Medicaid. This was due to the enhanced federal match rate that Congress included in the Coronavirus Relief Act passed in March. Medicaid spending has grown along with enrollment. While total spending in the program has grown by 8% per year, enrollment has grown by 7% per year in that same time period. Slide 5 shows how spending growth in Virginia's Medicaid program compares to spending growth in other states. Virginia falls right in between other states with spending growth of 49% between 2010 and 2018. The median growth is just slightly lower at 46%. In fiscal year 2020, Virginia spent $13.7 billion on Medicaid. Of that amount, 32%, or $4.3 billion of it, was state general funds. Federal funds covered 61% of the cost of Virginia's Medicaid program in fiscal year 2020. Slide 7 shows the difference between forecasted expenditures and actual expenditures. Actual expenditures were lower than what was forecast in both the base Medicaid program and the Medicaid expansion program. Across both programs, spending was 4% lower, or $558 million lower than forecast. Of that $558 million variance, only $35 million of it was state general funds. Slide 8 summarizes the two reasons for lower spending growth than anticipated in the past fiscal year. Spending was lower than projected, primarily due to lower spending per enrollee. Enrollment did increase more than forecast, but lower spending per enrollee made up for that higher than expected enrollment. Mr. Chairman, before we talk about the impact of COVID on Medicaid enrollment, I want to take a minute to explain to you how enrollment in Medicaid can grow. First, Medicaid enrollment can grow because people who have not previously been enrolled in the program have applied and been determined eligible, and therefore they're newly enrolled. Enrollment can also grow because from one year to the next, fewer people who are already enrolled in Medicaid are not disenrolled. So enrollment can grow from one year to the next when you have new Medicaid applications and enrollment, combined with fewer people coming off of the program. Both of these things have occurred in the past year due to the pandemic. First, the Federal Coronavirus Relief Act that went into effect in March contained a rule that required states to stop disenrolling people from Medicaid for the duration of the pandemic. States are required to halt disenrollments in order to qualify for the enhanced federal match rate. Additionally, while disenrollments have stopped, which swells enrollment, individuals have continued to apply to the program. DMAS estimates that new applications have increased as a result of the pandemic. However, we cannot estimate how many more new applications have been submitted above and beyond what we would normally expect in a year. Due to some issues with DSS and DMAS's data systems, new applications cannot be distinguished from re-enrollment applications. This prevents us from being able to look back at past experience to estimate how many new applications we would normally expect and compare that to how many new applications have been received since the beginning of the pandemic. DMAS and DSS are working to make changes to their data systems that will allow them to make these distinctions and answer this question in the future. While enrollment increased, Medicaid enrollees, like many Virginians, were reducing their use of medical services that weren't necessary. In fact, as you may recall, the governor issued a public health emergency order on March 25th that prohibited hospitals and outpatient centers from performing any non-emergency procedures. That order was in place until April 30th, which means that no non-emergency medical procedures were performed for just over a month. This reduced utilization of non-emergency services led to a lower cost per enrollee than was forecast for 2020. DMAS will release a preliminary new forecast on October 15th and a formal updated forecast on November 1st. These forecasts will likely contain a great deal of uncertainty. The preliminary forecast released on October 15th could be released before a decision is made on whether to extend the federal public health emergency declaration. The emergency declaration must be extended by October 24th to maintain the Federal Relief Act's Medicaid provisions, which include the freeze on disenrollments and the enhanced federal match rate. Both of these provisions impact enrollment and spending, but the federal government may not reach a decision before DMAS's preliminary forecast is issued in a few weeks. Additionally, new enrollments are likely to continue to grow due to the pandemic, but the rate of growth is difficult to predict. Spending per enrollee is also likely to be affected, but the degree to which enrollees will use medical services during the pandemic is also difficult to predict. This creates uncertainty in both the preliminary and the formal forecasts. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my update on Medicaid spending. I can respond to any questions you have, and DMAS staff are also available to answer any questions.
Commission members, do you have questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to your comment about the governor's mandate that did not allow non-emergency surgeries for the 1 month period, and I understand that is there any way, or has there been any effort to try to quantify what, as a novice, I would term as avoidance? I parenthetically heard many people indicate that they were not going to the emergency rooms because they were concerned about the pandemic situation and the potential of coming in contact with those that might be infected in the emergency room.
We didn't have data available to do that sort of analysis here. However, I can turn it over to DMAS's Chief Deputy Director, Ellen Montz, who may be able to shed more light on an answer to that question.
Sure. Good morning, folks. Happy to address that as it relates to Medicaid. We in the Medicaid agency have tracked and looked at both of our data coming out of our fee-for-service program, our claims data, as well as data coming from our managed care plans in the form of encounter data, kind of tracked service utilization across, how it changed from what we would otherwise expected beginning in March and tracking it through, currently we're tracking through August. And so we have seen in pretty much by and large, with the exception of a few service lines, we do see dramatic declines in service utilization for, ER utilization, general outpatient utilization, certainly inpatient utilization, particularly in the months of March, April, and May. And we'll note that we have seen kind of a rebound as services have come back online, although we are seeing that rebound has not yet gotten us back to what we would have otherwise expected in a world without COVID. Although we are getting pretty close to, pretty close to service utilization that would otherwise be expected now in the August, September range.
Mr. Chairman.
So Delegate Sickles.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Ms. Montz, could you
clarify or repeat what the situation with the FMAP is right now? When does that expire? And what are you hearing from your fellow Medicaid directors about the potential to continue?
Sure. Late breaking, late Friday afternoon, Secretary Azar did announce that the public health emergency would be extended. So upon announcement, any extension is always a 90-day extension. So now, instead of expiring September 23rd, we are expiring January 23rd. That means that the maintenance of effort and the continuous enrollment requirements that the federal government places upon Medicaid will be in effect until January 23rd. It also means that the enhanced FMAP of 6.2% will be in effect through March of 2021. And so we have pivoted very quickly, and our team spent a lot of this weekend kind of rejiggering our forecast to reflect our preliminary forecast to reflect that expansion of the public health emergency.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Alex Sickles.
Yeah, could you tell us when your next estimate's going to be published?
Yes, so that will be October 15th will be our preliminary forecast. So in just 10 short days.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, Tommy again.
There's Norman.
I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this question, so hopefully Mrs. Mons can decipher it. As a result of the governor's mandate on non-emergency usage or surgery and the decline in emergency room audit or avoidance, has that in any way, how has that adversely impacted the hospitals, and has it had any impact on the provider assessments that they're required to pay?
Yeah, let me attempt to address some of that. I think we do see, as I stated before, kind of a decline in utilization for inpatient as well as emergency room visits, particularly during March, April, May. We do know that that decline in utilization means a decline in revenue. We also have, to kind of counterbalance that, we do have a fair amount of kind of direct support coming from the federal government through the CARES Act and the Provider Relief Fund. And so we at DMAS have not taken a look at whether or not that kind of decrease in revenue that resulted from lower utilization during the peak of COVID was indeed kind of fully counterbalanced, or what percentage of that kind of revenue hole was made up for with the kind of direct support and subsidies through the federal government.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Well, thank you to the staff and to Ellen for that update on the Medicaid enrollment and spending. That report does not require a motion. How about wraps it up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would update the commission on where we are on study topic selection briefly, if that's okay. The commission, the staff have proposed study resolutions for a number of studies based on the guidance that the study topic selection subcommittee gave us. I believe Delegate Sickles plans to call a meeting of the subcommittee prior to the November JLARC meeting for the purpose of considering which of the proposed studies to recommend that we actually conduct in 2021. The subcommittee's recommendations would then be brought to the full commission for consideration and approval at the November JLARC meeting. Delegate Sickles, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Hal. I think you covered it. We've got some good ideas. We got to make sure that
we're not going to be duplicating efforts with all the commissions that are so vibrant around the General Assembly. Make sure we're all, pulling in the same direction, and we're not doing anything repetitive. But we do have some good subjects. The most popular one from our colleagues is to do a deep dive into the Virginia Employment Commission. And we know they were hit by an unprecedented workload this year, which was probably the largest reason why we had so many constituents calling and contacting our offices. We need to look at how this pandemic might help us make the whole process more efficient as we go forward when we get back to normal times. So that was the biggest request we had, but there's several other things. And if you want to hear the rest of them now, we could do that, but I think you don't want to do that. So that would come to our November meeting, and we'll go over. I'll make a report on what the committee is recommending. Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Doug Sickles. Mr. Chairman, that completes the agenda from the staff standpoint. Our next meeting will be on Monday, November the 16th. We'll be presenting the findings from two major studies, our review of the Children's Services Act and our review on marijuana legalization. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Other items from members of the commission? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second?
Second.
Say aye.
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 Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hal.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.